Well, undoubtedly, Aristotle is the one who energized me most, and with whom I found so much sagacity that I could not deny that this guy is just above, head and shoulders above anybody else. Reading him from the beginning, and I really read politics, ethics, metaphysics, even though I always knew that these were notes kept by his students and then assembled, and he was not always directly involved. Still, the ideas in them just blow you away. I mean, anybody who wants to have a grasp of things, especially community life, friendship, all of those things, I think Aristotle is just a must. It's certainly the beginning, if not the complete story on many issues. I think, of course, that there are some very nice ideas in some of the Stoics. I am very fascinated, although I disagree with Democritus and with Lucretius. Some of these thinkers try to solve certain philosophical problems, but in ways that I think never got off the ground. There are some minor figures, like I read Xenophon and some of his dialogues, including one in his book called Memorabilia between Pericles and Alcibiades. And there's a fascinating discussion on law in which Alcibiades uses a reductio ad absurdum on Pericles to show that any law that includes coercion is not a valid law. This was like way back then, you know. It was fascinating for me to discover this. Then I have, as I mentioned to you, I have been a very great fan of some of Locke's works, although not all of his philosophy, and I'm not sure the whole thing hangs together. Suffice it to say that a certain version of natural law ethics, combined with his natural rights theory, basically turned out to be the foundation of the only kind of just polity that I think human beings have managed to come up with. But I also like Thomas Reid, a little studied Scottish philosopher who to me is gotten some very good insights about ethics, about politics, about ordinary human relations. Now, in the contemporary world, you know, I've also done a little work on Spencer, who is, by the way, in my estimation, every bit as powerful as Marx, but being an individualist. He didn't get to be as famous because Marx is actually just carrying out the Christian dream of a huge commune, not in the sky, but here. And Spencer was an individualist, but similarly a historicist. And he should have gotten all the credit that Marx got, but people weren't individualistic. They didn't have the kind of spirit of individualism as much as they needed in order to embrace him. Although Christianity has something to do with individualism, because if you really are personally loved by God, that somehow makes you important as an individual. Anyway, that's my sidebar. Now, in the contemporary era, I was very fond of J.L. Austin, especially his seminal article, Other Minds. It was actually an eye-opener about the nature of knowledge, which then Rand completed for me with her Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, where I think the whole Platonic tradition of what knowledge must be finally got criticized. That knowledge is not a final story. It is the best story. And almost 80% of philosophy stumbled because it understood knowledge to be the final story. I mean, look at Kant. If it's not the final story, it's not really knowledge. It's only phenomenal knowledge instead of noumenal knowledge. All this stuff, I think, is due to this misunderstanding of what model we must deploy when we seek a theory of knowledge. The model that was recommended ever since Plato was that you have to have a necessary timeless truth for there to be knowledge. And I think that's just a terrible mistake. And Austin's Other Minds lays this out very well, and I think Rand's book also lays this out very well. Now, there are others who I really found very, very rewarding. One was David L. Norton, who unfortunately died several years ago at age 65. But his book, Personal Destinies, A Philosophy of Ethical Individualism, is just a beaut, a philosophical masterpiece, in my opinion. There are some other people who are off the radar, people like Ed Poles, who used to be at a college up in Maine, who wrote books like Radical Realism and Acts of Our Being, A Defense of Free Will, which is a really apt title, that freedom of the will really amounts to your acting and your originating those acts and being the kind of being that can do that. You know, I think it's very good. There are probably others I'm overlooking right now who I found very instructive, very helpful. I read Montaigne. And while Montaigne is a skeptic, and I disagree with his sort of deep-seated skepticism, if you read him for cautionary purposes, not to get too enamored with your own beliefs, to make sure that you're right, rather than just simply embracing things, Montaigne is a great antidote to any form of dogmatism, to any form of enthusiastic philosophy. You know, I am not a Humean. I've never been fond of Hobbes. I've never been fond of Berkeley, but I did conclude after studying the classics and the moderns that, you know, there's something in everybody. As long as they have stood the test of time, as long as they have managed to engage people, as long as there is a certain amount of... So there are exceptions like Rousseau. I can't fathom anybody taking Rousseau seriously, okay? But, you know, and I can fathom them taking Hegel seriously. You can see how uncritical I can get, you know? But Rousseau is just beyond the pale. Amongst the contemporaries whom I really despise, although he's a very charming, now dead, was Richard Rorty, who, by the way, was the dissertation advisor of David Kelly. Rorty's radical pragmatism, subjectivism, relativism, whatever the hell you call his ism, is one of the most insidious influences in modern philosophy, contemporary philosophy, including, especially, in the philosophy of law. And right now we have somebody who's kind of a Rortyite, who's very close to the President of the United States, a man named Cass Sunstein, who's a Harvard philosopher, was recently, or before that, a Chicago professor of law, and their idea that rights are invented by government and grants of government is a pure reactionary idea, taking us back to the age where kings believed that they could give rights to people. And so that kind of philosophical pragmatism, actually, it's not even a respectable form of pragmatism. It's a perverted pragmatism. It's not the pragmatism of Charles Peirce. It's the pragmatism of C.I. Lewis, for whom even logic was an invention. These people, like Ernest Nagel, logic without metaphysics, those were my nemesis. Those are the people I have always argued with and tried to respond to. I like some opponents better than others. Amartya Sen, who's this polymath, Nobel laureate in economics, right now teaching at Harvard University, whom I know a little bit personally, though not a lot, and I don't know if he would admit it, because I have been critical of his global egalitarianism, which to me ushers in tyranny, and he doesn't think so. He's a sort of Habermasian about political principles. You get political principles out of discussions. But I don't think he has an adequate answer to the question, by what right do people participate in the discussion? If the discussion is what establishes our rights, when someone challenges your right to be in a discussion, how do you defend it? You can't point to another discussion. It's an infinite regret. Anyway, nonetheless, he's an extremely educated person, very civilized and very personable when you talk to him. He is an egalitarian. He used to be very close to Martha Nussbaum, another avid egalitarian at the University of Chicago. Sen co-taught courses with Nozick at Harvard, so he knows the libertarian tradition quite well. He is a developmental economist and was close to Peter Bauer, who's a libertarian developmental economist. Some of these people are really worth paying attention to, worth coming to terms with, and sometimes there just isn't enough time to do so. The reason I'm so prolific is not because I just love to hear myself talk and write, but because there's so much to do. And I don't think people are doing it. And even if sometimes I may not be doing it to the level of depth that would solve it all, I think at least teasing people's minds with proposed solutions is vital, and that's why I'm in the game.